me welcome all of you and delighted that you are here in one of the continuing efforts of expanding our involvement, interest, action, and results in terms of making this a much more diverse campus. And part of that is the ability to understand what diversity is, that it is not just the way you look and what color you have, but there's a lot of aspects to that, and part of Professor Halualani's work has been that of mapping some of the efforts and some of the directions and some of the scattering shots and some of the more rifle approach shots. I'm delighted because she was also from our sister campus of San Jose State, so she knows the context of the California State University. So, delighted and look forward to being with you to see.
And now Elisa, our diversity coordinator.
Very briefly, my name is Elisa Velasquez. I'm a professor of psychology and the newly appointed director of diversity and inclusive excellence. And the message that I want you to take home today is that this is a very exciting time in our campus from the university. There are a lot of committees working on different aspects of diversity, and we're trying, that's my job, to coordinate all the efforts and identify the baseline that we have so far and then move forward. So take the message home. This is very exciting. Believe me, trust me, we are going to get there, which will be very oriented and very strategic. So welcome and thank you.
All right, Rona, you're on.
Okay.
And tell us when you want the lights off. We've got a light.
Oh, I think I'm going to leave.
You can't leave them on.
Yeah, isn't it too dark?
Well, why don't you try it and tell us if you want it on or off. Well,
Yeah, it might be a little bit dark.
Yeah.
Is that too dark?
no,
not at all.
we'd rather see it.
Oh, okay. All right. I don't get to see you, but that's okay. I'll see you outside.
You'll see what we're
Well, thank you everybody for your welcomes. I am Dr. Rona Halualani. I'm so thrilled to be at your beautiful campus. I am founder and principal of my consulting firm, Halualani Associates. I'm also a full-time professor at San Jose State University for the last 13 years, so I'm very familiar with the State University in that light. I want to, you can only see their shadows, but you'll see them afterwards too. My two research associates on this project, you're going to stand, and they're also going to talk, is Hugh Hiker, Christopher Lancaster, recent MA graduates from San Jose State University in the Department of Common Studies, and really have great diversity expertise, so they're excellent on this project. So we're going to take you through kind of our results and our finding. I was asked about a year ago to conduct an exercise that we did for our campus, San Jose State University, and also a few other campuses around the country. And it's called mapping. And what mapping is actually taking an inventory or taking stock of what an institution has done and is doing with regard to diversity. And I put that in quotes because it's always interesting to see how a campus defines diversity or approaches it by way of events, clubs, courses, practices, or programs. So we really wanted to see how that emerged in our analysis. And the great thing about mapping is that it actually tells you what a campus has been doing. Not what a campus wants to do. Not what a campus thinks it should do. But what did it already do? Puts the metal to the pedal, so to speak. And to take stock of what they're doing with respect to diversity, it allows us to look at, are there duplication efforts? It's amazing on any campus, no matter what the size is, that sometimes you're not able to know what the left hand is doing by virtue of the right hand. What is a program that's being done in this particular office and this program in another office? It's amazing how you might not know that. Are they doing similar things? And if they are, could they intensify the effort by maybe doing it together? Could they maybe even streamline pools of money, which we know is rare and far between in California right now with higher education? And so duplication efforts really helps with regard to that. Are there coordination efforts that can help to be identified? And what are the strengths of the institution? What do you already do well with regard to diversity? And what perhaps don't you do well, or don't do at all? What are the empty zones, or the gaps, or the limitations? Is also something that can be done for mapping. And any leverage points or needed areas. So that's what our job is to do. It took us pretty much about half the year to really comb everything, the website, all of your documents, to do this mapping, and it will emerge in a final product of pretty large-scale mapping posters with a final report with some recommendations. So I'll talk a little bit more about that afterwards. Here's our methodology, because I think this is the question that we get asked at a lot, is that we created a survey where we wanted to collect information from all of you, from divisions, managers, employees, non-instructional employees, staff members, faculty members, and administrators about things that have been done on campus with regard to diversity. So we created a Survey Monkey, where it was a survey that had several pages where you could fill in, literally, information about a program, the name of it, who was it being served, what was your budget allocation for that program, if you remember, any particular aspect, and it was pretty thorough that you could actually answer multiple efforts on the survey. And we featured that from February through May. We also ran a search in terms of any newspaper article that was written about your campus on diversity. And we found quite a bit. We found quite a bit on Google and local presses, some more controversial than others, some challenging the notion of the demographic diversity and perhaps its limitations here at San State, to be frank and candid. And also some other aspects which I'll talk about and refer to in this presentation. We looked at two primary areas. We looked at diversity-related courses, or what courses related, in fact, to diversity, and also any effort, program, or activity that related to or touched upon diversity. And we'll talk a little bit more. We used a software, which is a kind of a brainstorming software for you? Mind mapping, and it's called MindJet, and you can look it up. It's one of many softwares, and it's pretty useful for our purposes for now. And then we analyzed all of the entries and the maps through hand coding. And I actually am a quantitative and a qualitative researcher, so I analyzed everything again through NVivo, which is the new form of NUMIST, which is a software program for qualitative data, and QDA Miner. And I can share my later. Here's our methodology definitions. Diversity, effort, program, and activity. We didn't want to narrow the definition too much where it would exclude most things. We defined it as any program that promoted the active appreciation of all campus members in terms of their backgrounds, identities, and experiences. It could be an event. It could be a scholarship award. It could be a speaker series. It could be a grant. It could be a faculty publication. It could be a mission statement in a department. It could be a policy or a practice. It could be any of those things. So we casted our net pretty wide to make sure that we weren't leaving anything out. Diversity-related courses focused on issues and topics related to cultural groups, backgrounds, identities, and experiences, and/or promotes difference, inclusion, or cultural sharing. So we wanted to see in the far corners of economics, political science, science, mathematics, psychology, any department that had any curricular offering that related to diversity. And we went about the coding of the courses in a different way from a student perspective, which we find to be really the most important perspective with regard to our work here on this campus and any campus, and we'll explain that in a moment as well. So two big chunks, courses and whatnot. There are 4 maps. We're going to give you a preview of those maps today, and the final versions are being finalized, and we're going to deliver them later on in the year. There's courses non-GE or general education and general education. It's really important to look at general education. What a campus is offering in terms of general education, the promise of a liberal education, and what courses make the list. Is there, the big debate nationally is, should there always be a required diversity course in high school, for example, or in community colleges, or at four-year universities? And many GE systems have that. And so we wanted to see, not necessarily that you had to have a requirement, but how is diversity infused in your GE offerings? Is it a common theme throughout every GE course? Is it present in a GE area or a GE section, or is it really kind of excluded to one particular course, for example? We also did maps by division. So we looked at all the efforts by every division. What we mean by division is academic affairs, student affairs and enrollment management, admin and finance, all of those different aspects, maybe any of your auxiliaries, and departments, academic colleges. We try to look at by division where are all the efforts being concentrated. And the other map is efforts by theme. And what we mean by theme is the function of the effort. Is it curricular? Is it extracurricular, which is a club or an offering outside of class or not connected to class? Is it an award? Is it research? Is it a mission statement? Is it a procedure? Any of those missions. And we'll explain a little bit about our legend. Central being, we had designations of central and partial. And the maps have been reflect information that's been submitted to us as of this past summer. Let's talk a little bit about courses, and I'm going to have Chris come up here and help me talk a bit about that and your methodology, and then we'll go over what we found. So some real interesting areas of strength that you could actually leverage at this campus are in your curricular offerings. Tell me when you want me to.
It's just the same thing. It's just the day for labels.
No, you're interested
So the process of cataloging all of your diversity courses begins with the campus catalog. I go through it page by page. We've tested out trying to do some kind of web-based search or something like that, and we found that the search engines that we use for going through PDFs and things like that to comb through your catalogs often don't find everything, and we like to make sure that we can find as much as possible. Variations on words and things like that. And sometimes we find that the course descriptions in the catalogs don't contain any of the keywords that we're searching for anyway. But what they do is sometimes talk around the issue that we're actually trying to investigate. So is this their data or ours?
No, I'm sorry. That's misprint.
Did we just forget to put
Yeah. That's SSU. My fingers go a little fast.
So as you can see from this, there are 501 active diversity-related courses on your campus. It's about 14% of the total curriculum, which
Can I jump in?
yeah, sure.
Sorry about that, SJSU, but it's something that's really important is many of you that submitted information about courses wanted to know how we made a designation of central and partial. Please know that this is from a student perspective, so we use the catalog. Students will look for courses, oftentimes based on the catalog, most times, and those course descriptions. We tried to do online syllabi or what we could get, but not all of it was accessible. So we really went at it from that angle. Now, I know many of us in the room who are faculty say, oh gosh, I inherited a lot of these catalog descriptions for courses that I teach that were in presence in the 70s, right? And I think that for us, a meaningful document where we can legend or color code diversity and what aspect is being covered and what students are going to gain is something that we want more catalogs or university materials to reflect. So we'll talk a little bit more, but that's really kind of the key of why we use the catalog and whatnot.
Well, we say non-GE. There are 358 courses that are non-GE specific, undergraduate courses, including a graduate, 45% focus on diversity, 29% partial. The central and partial designation really look at, is the entire intent of this class to enhance the student's understanding of diversity, or is it something that maybe is sort of part of the larger curriculum and maybe isn't a focus necessarily, something that maybe the course uses it as examples for things, but not always, and things like that.
Let me talk a little bit about this.
Oh, okay. Well, and were saying about the way that we code. Again, we go through it page by page. We read every single description. So it's a way to determine if the student who reads this, and we read it much more closely than a student probably would anyway. But in terms of determining whether this class will tell the student that they will get this information from this course, it's pretty important. And actually, this has benefited our college a little bit, where one entire school determined that even though all of their courses discuss diversity in at least a partial and many times a central focus, the catalog didn't say anything about that, and the departments just sort of took it for granted. So in the next catalog that we have coming out, each one of those course descriptions has been updated to really highlight the fact that even though it's a health-specific course, they really talk about it in terms of how do the diverse people in the United States view health and nutrition and things like that.
Yeah, and let me add that you've got, and we're going to show you the maps in a minute, is that with active diversity-related courses, it's 14% of your total university curriculum. That's based off of the total number of undergraduate and graduate courses for last year's academic year. So I got those numbers specifically for the campus. That's not a high percentage. It's a decent percentage, but many institutions have anywhere from 20 to 45% of their total curriculum related directly to diversity. What is promising, however, is that 45% are centrally focused on diversity. That's a pretty high percentage. San Jose State University, we have a great deal of university curricular offerings. We only had 25% centrally focused. So it's not just the quantity, but it's really the quality within the quantity. Are you making the most of your total university curricular offerings? And for us, it's always an issue of, what do you mean that you're talking or teaching about diversity in your class? Is it 1 week? Is it a theme interwoven throughout the entire course? Is it a theme interwoven throughout your entire department? I mean, we had several departments that were exemplars where they had assignments on it, they had common assessment instruments on it, they had culminating experiences on it, and so you name it, there's so many things that you can do with regard to diversity and how you're expressing that in your curricular offerings. And let's give them a preview, yes? Let me take you out a little bit. I'm not a very techno person, but I can show you. Which one do you want first, Chris? We'll do courses. Okay, so you won't be able to see all the fine print, but this is an example of one of our mappings of all the SSU courses. Okay, and it's by college, correct, Chris? And department?
Did you guys call it schools?
Schools, yes, we do call it schools. So you'll see the schools here, and you'll see departments, and we have a legend that we're going to make sure we send to SSU, and it'll be on the map, so any of you will be able to access it. And you'll see these different bubbles, and those relate to individual courses. So it's actually a great deal of detail. On some of these where we have more information, there's a bubble that you can actually compress for notation. And the color coding scheme, Chris, is yellow and red.
The red are partial. Any kind of focus on diversity, whatever the subject might be, but only a partial, meaning less than 50% of the course material centers on diversity. Whereas the yellow ones are divided up into 4 different sections. We have social justice,
Yes.
historically underrepresented groups. Historically underrepresented meaning basically anything that isn't white men. Able-bodied white men. So, able-bodied white heterosexual men. Getting all up there. So, anything LGBT.
Here you go.
Right, there we go. So, historically underrepresented is anything from LGBT to disability to gender, ethnic background, anything that we can think of that would qualify as diversity. If it's an underrepresented group, we added it to that. Social justice, either locally or globally, so classes that focus on, now that we know where the inequalities are, what do we do to try to start to fix those inequalities. Global perspectives, meaning understanding culture and difference as it applies to an increasingly globalized community. And central, meaning that either we couldn't figure out if it fit into one of those three categories because there wasn't enough information, or it seemed to focus on everything and just gave an overview of diversity in general. And then the partial focus are the red ones that we saw on the map.
So the diversity course offerings, with those designations, and it was for us to make more meaningful sense of it, was, and this is a conversation you all are going to have on this campus, like most campuses, is that when a course covers something like a global issue or internationalization or some international aspect of culture, is that the same thing, or is that what we mean by diversity? So how are we defining diversity? Is diversity US-based, historically underrepresented, societal and structural systems of inequality? Or is culture and diversity something much larger? I mean, and the global and the local, we know, are very much informed of each other. Yolanda Moses talks quite a bit about this in her research. But what do we mean by that? So I'm going to allude to that finding a bit later. You're not in it. I just wanted to talk about this. Is the good news is 46% of those diversity course offerings in the total numbers have a generalized focus on diversity. 32% do focus on global issues, and we wanted to ferret that out a little bit more, but we didn't have enough information and couldn't find enough. So you're going to need to kind of look at the internationalization versus domestic issue or dynamic. But 24% focus on historically underrepresented groups, whether it was history, whether it was everyday experiences, whether it was conversations or curricular material about identity. And that's pretty heartening because the historically underrepresented aspect of diversity is something very, very important to the U.S. context, to this context, to any context that needs to be taught with regard to our students. I kind of broke this down by the different schools, and this might be germane to the nature of their material that they teach. So it makes more sense that the School of Arts and Humanities and the School of Social Sciences have the highest number of diversity-related courses. But I kind of want us to get out of that framework. I know that some faculty will come to me and say, Rona, makes sense for you that you have all these diversity-related courses. That's your research area. You've got your PhD in that. You teach it in comm studies. I'm a mathematician, right? Or I'm a chemist. We don't really talk about that. I don't have any room to talk about that. And I think, again, it's the notion of, well, there are a lot of ways to infuse diversity, whether it's with regard to the environment, the population that we're living in, whether it's with regard to some skills or some orientations that you're preparing them with. We were intrigued by a number of your course offerings, Chris, in your catalog that totally blew the theory of you have to teach in a department that has diversity-related content for it to be a diversity course, right?
Yeah, we actually wanted to compliment your mathematics department on the fact that they have 2 whole classes that are devoted to understanding mathematics as they relate to diversity, which is more than we found in any institution catalogs we've been through. So we found that kind of impressive. Ethnomathematics was one, and
mathematics and politics.
Right. Yeah, that both sort of looked at diversity in terms of how mathematics can be applied.
We would like to take that course. So.
Yeah.
We actually were intrigued with those courses and those descriptions and wanted to get the syllabi to send to our own institution. Again, another example of you can take traditional content, even in STEM areas, and relate it to diversity and make it meaningful for your students and having those conversations about that. I love that whole notion. And then lastly, the schools that have the most departments offering diversity-related courses. Talk a little bit about that. Education also came up, of course, and one could argue that it relates to their subject matter more. But those definitely have the most departments that offer diversity-related courses from what we could see, because you looked at departments and what they offer. School of Arts and Humanities and Social Sciences, even though they have the most courses, they actually have the most central focused diversity courses. So again, what we thought to be the majority of their courses offering content related to that particular topic. And GE, why don't you go ahead and talk about GE?
Well, one of the things that we do, is map your GE courses. And instead of focusing on a central or partial amount of content, what we do is we create a map with all of your GE courses in it. And we plot out which ones coincide with our other list. So we find where there are sections of your general education that students can get through without taking any kind of diversity-related course. If that happens to be something like science, where we don't normally expect to see it, we don't worry about it that much. But if it's in a section that the focus of that general education area is supposed to be on diversity, then we start to worry a little bit about any holes that we see. And I think we found
A couple of flagged areas.
A couple of flagged areas. There were 4 areas where we thought there should be no gaps. Fundamentals of communication.
My own discipline.
Biological sciences, we felt like there were places that you could fit things in there, special emphasis. And then, what was that, U.S. Constitution? That's a section.
I believe that's a section.
And there was also one that seemed to focus on the social sciences, but we found 1 or 2 classes that we didn't think, not to say that they don't have any, but that based on the catalog description, we weren't able to determine.
Right. And 51% of the total GE curriculum here, which I think is a high number for diversity-related courses. That's high. That's higher than my institution right now. I think I cataloged 4 other CSUs, and it's the highest out of all 5. So that's a leverage point that certainly can be used. And even though the GE courses only represent 21%, that's still a really large percentage of your total GE curriculum. In addition to that, you want me to show it? Let me show you the map. We just want to show it because it took a long time. So, Hugh and Chris are whizzes with all these graphics.
Yeah. So here's what I was explaining, that we mapped out your entire GE, and the blue sections represent classes where we know we could determine from the catalog description that there was definitely some, whether partial or central, emphasis on diversity. The gray ones are the ones where we couldn't see any diversity in the description. And so, I mean, you have a lot of sections where there might be 1 or 2 holes.
And I guess the issue becomes, what's your function of your GE? Is the function of your GE to make sure that every student who goes through general education has this theme covered, has at least, because they get to choose from a variety of options depending on the area in most GE, or is there a course that you would want all of them to take? Again, what is the orientation you want your students to have, and how would you like to bear out in GE? That conversation needs to happen, definitely. And maybe you've already had this conversation, and I just didn't see it. But it's a fruitful one. We're having it on our campus. I know other campuses are trying to figure that out. And not that general education is easy to change, by no means, but definitely something to think about as our world is changing, as our students' interests are changing, as their questions are changing about diversity in this Barack Obama era, in this very different world. So there's that aspect as well.
Well, a catalog in the description, if we know that the course actually has that emphasis in there, can usually a lot more easily be changed than an entire GE requirement.
Okay. Let's move on to the next slide. So here's kind of our recommendations, and add in when you think I'm forgetting something,
Sure.
as I do, is that the leverage point, the strength point, is you have a great deal of strong curricula at SSU with regard to diversity. You have it in your GE predominantly, and you have it in many of your schools. You have enough existing curricula right now, if you wanted to do something now, to do interdisciplinary minors, to do certificate programs, to even collaborate on graduate professional programs with regard to this theme. And I know that you have a grant, I just heard about a grant you received about learning communities, and you certainly have enough course content and curricular offerings to do that. There's some great literature out there in higher education about unique ways to run courses together.
There was a pilot at my institution where we had a first-year seminar, right? And we would get 2 different professors from 2 different departments. We had a political scientist, we had a religious studies scholar, and I believe we had a psychologist. They would all be signed up for the same section of a first-year seminar, and it was quite large, the seminar. It was as if they were each assigned to 30 students, but they would bring students into a lecture room like this, and each week they would pick out different topics related to their research areas, this political science, this religious studies scholar, this psychologist, and they would debate these perspectives amongst each other for that particular hour. And then they would spend maybe the second class after that talking about why they had come to those particular viewpoints. Here was the evidence that they did. Here's why they saw it. What were some differences that they saw with regard to those viewpoints. And that really, I think for me, gets at diversity. It gets at ideological diversity, perspectival diversity, and political diversity. It is a successful pilot, so much so that now across, we call them colleges, we're trying to get chemists together with engineers, with literature scholars about different ways that they look at nature, the environment, climate, all sorts of topics. So that can certainly be done with your course content, and I make a lot of these recommendations. There needs to be, though, a conversation at SSU about the goal of curriculum with regard to diversity. So is diversity a theme? Is it a context that you point to? This is the common mantra that we see nationally. You must learn about diversity because you'll be working in a diverse workforce. I mean, we hear that a lot, right? And I totally agree with that. But it can also be something more. It could be a perspective, a perspectival orientation. If you look at AAC&U, which is the Association of American Colleges and Universities, and their LEAP outcomes, diversity is about complex thinking, perspective taking, working in a group where you are not the majority opinion. Those kinds of orientations and perspectives relate to diversity. It's not just about what someone looks like or the color of their skin, which does have an effect, but it's much, much more. The catalog descriptions, we have a dream. Chris and I and Hugh have a dream that catalogs will be much more informative, and that's not necessarily something that can be done right away. Where we wanted on our campus a catalog that had a legend, that actually had symbols for what aspect of diversity, what perspective of diversity was covered, and meaningfully so in which department. The symbols would be by the course descriptions and course titles. We're not there yet, and I have yet to see an institution there yet. I can always dream, but it's an informative, when a student says, I'd love to learn about this particular group, I'd love to learn more about disability studies. It's something I'm just never going to get in my major content. I think I want to know more about it. What is this about? And they can actually find a course that relates to it. Much more user-friendly, right?
Yeah, and it can be helpful, really helpful. I mean, you might have a student who's looking for, something they're going to learn about social justice and the LGBT community, and they might think that they're starved for choice when they might be looking right at a class in the catalog and just not know it because the description doesn't make any mention of it.
Yeah, absolutely. It's true. How do we know diversity is being meaningfully covered? That's again a question. How do you know? How do you know that the courses that say that they're teaching diversity, and I don't mean this as some, check-up system, but how do we know? Is it a one-shot isolated case? Is it something that we can see in our assignments? Do we have portfolios where students can actually showcase evidence of their learning so we can make sure that these perspectives that we are trying to expose them to and how they're being invoked and how they're being understood. And what does diversity mean in context of this university? I think that's something we're really intrigued with. We come from an institution, and I work with other institutions that have very different demographics than this institution. So what does it mean here? Your fall 2009 enrollments say that you're 59% white European American student base. That doesn't mean at a predominantly white institution that you can't seriously invoke diversity and equal, but it will look differently. And what does that mean? What does that look like? What do we want? What do we want our students to end up with? What kind of people, what kind of citizens we're talking about, do we want them to be at the end of our time here at Sonoma State University is a question that needs to be discussed, that every institution needs to discuss. We should also rethink diversity from just content. It's not just content, it's also a form of inquiry. So there's some really great research out there, and Chris and Hugh always hear me talk about it, where it can be utilized in very traditional subject material. So for example, I went to a presentation at AACU a while back of a statistics professor. A statistics professor who teaches an introductory statistics class, very traditional method, approach, all the basics. Well, he called it a diversity course, and I was intrigued as to why he would say that. And he calls it a diversity course because every example, every data set that he uses in this basic statistics course relates to the LGBT population. So what he did is he did a concept map of the kinds of questions students asked at the beginning of the semester with regard to statistics, and then a concept map of questions students had with regard to LGBT populations. And then he did the same concept map after the class had ended. What did they know about questions about statistics? What kinds of questions did they ask about LGBT populations after this class? And he has some interesting results. He found that by exposing case studies, data sets, content about LGBT, and this wasn't, forcing a political view, but looking at the kind of data that's collected on LGBT populations, how that's interpreted, standard deviations, all that stuff, students had not only more questions, more complex questions about LGBT populations, they had more complex questions about statistics. So if diversity is treated as inquiry, it can help with regard not just to learning about people or groups, but it might actually help intensify and infuse traditional material even more. And it's all about learning. So I'm really intrigued with that concept. And I can actually send SSU the sites of that and research on that because it's very, very important. I might be running out of time. Okay. I'm talking too much. Diversity as a curricular theme or a focus for all courses. Again, the same example. Examples, assignments, perspectives. And, this is a terminology being used, it's been used for the last 5 years. Multicultural competence, intercultural understanding, perspective taking, complex thinking, and allies. There's a great deal of curricular material out now, particularly in institutions with demographics like this that are starting to approach allies. Thinking of and advocating for the other, thinking beyond oneself to someone else and perhaps they don't benefit from, but to thinking about their own care, their well-being, and their health. Other things related to courses, these are some of my recommendations, which I kind of need to go over kind of quickly before we move on to the efforts, is invest in professional development for faculty and staff to incorporate inclusive approaches. So there's a lot of inclusive pedagogy literature out there, ways to make sure you're getting at different learners with different learning styles, talking about different examples. Perhaps if you're in a history course and there's not a lot of published material from one particular perspective, perhaps you could find ways to include narratives about that or documentaries about that. And there's a lot of examples, and so could there be professional development to figure out ways to be more inclusive in the class on this campus. Grant opportunities, there's a lot of grant opportunities, not just through NSF, but through the humanities associations out there, through AACU, where they're looking at curricular innovations, outcome assessment on diversity, and also focused learning. So there's some opportunities for research out there. And what I would recommend as the next step is for perhaps someone on this campus, your diversity coordinator or a team, to actually look at course syllabi and materials and assignments from faculty across all the schools to see what constitutes diversity in the different departments, in the different schools, and overall campus-wide. Because I think that's something we want to do on our campus. Are we looking a lot at language? Are we looking at a lot of international or immigrant aspects? Are we looking at identity, race, ethnicity, gender? It'll be interesting to find out. Second set of maps. This is where he will come in. Relates at the university diversity efforts. And we looked at efforts in terms of policies, events, practices, research, additional curricular or co-curricular projects that weren't in the catalog. You come on up. There were 146 active diversity efforts on campus. We think active. We couldn't tell from some of your material if some things were one-shot deals. And that's kind of an issue we'll talk about later. 75% of these efforts are centrally focused on diversity, which is a high amount. meaning that they were created first and foremost for that purpose. They weren't just a general program that had diversity as part of it. It was something that was created for that sole purpose, and 25% as partially focused. So I'm going to show the map while Hugh talks about it. I'll show you it first.
You get big for maps.
They're really big, so it's hard for us to show you it all. Is that good, Hugh?
I think that's a good microphone.
Yeah. Just see the dimensions of this one.
So the legend for this is similar to the legend that we used for Chris's map on courses, to where the red are partial and the yellow are primary efforts. And then we have the sub-classifications that align with those as well. So I'll skip over that part because you've heard it. Something that I'd like to point out about doing mapping that's important is that a visual map seems to speak to people who view them differently than a bar graph, because you can really see an overview of your entire institution, and by using color, you can see this proportion, you see how things emerge. It was a little bit more of an organic experience of engaging the map. How we build the map and how we did the research is primarily my role was taking data from the internet and
anything that was sent to us.
And anything that was sent to us, and we put it in a huge spreadsheet, and that's where we organize it, and then we take that and put it right into the map. Now, your maps are based on your organizational charts of your institution. Those organizational charts are the ones available to us through your website. So that's an interesting point, because if you look at it, it's like a beautiful tree of your institution. The interesting thing that we encountered is that it was very difficult on a structure level for your institution to find out who owns what department. There were some disconnects between the branches of your organizational chart. So from a diversity point of view, that became an interesting point, because how do you know what diversity effort is being done and by whom if it doesn't match up with your organizational chart? Another interesting point is that I started taking the perspective when doing my internet research of I felt like I was familiarizing myself with your campus. And as diversity becomes more and more of a selling point to students, students are looking for diversity. Now, so if I were a prospective student, I wanted to come to your university and I wanted to find the diversity, or if I were a member of a particular group and I wanted to find a place where I belonged, how easy would it be for me to find an event, a club, a course, a professor who specializes in a certain area? And what I found is that you have a lot of really great efforts, but once again, a lot of them were one-off events that may have said that they were annual, but I maybe only found that it happened in 2008, but not again in 2009. And then when I would try to go and see, we're really interested in ownership, because we want to see who are the people who are creating these efforts on campus. It was a lot of times very difficult to track down the individuals who were in charge of steering these events, or creating these clubs, or advising them. So from a student perspective, or from somebody, or maybe even a faculty perspective of saying, I'm interested in working at SSU, I started to think maybe it might be a little bit difficult for me to find where I plug into SSU. And the thing is, when you look a little bit deeper, you have a lot of really great efforts. So it's not that they aren't there, it's just a matter of how are you represented on the internet.
And as you see here, and I was kind of scrolling earlier in the diversity by unit map, so this is my division, the one I showed you. This one's actually by theme, so we went and looked at what kinds of things was academic program support for undergrad, academic program support, high school outreach. We tried to take all the major categories that these efforts related to, and we put them together, we summarized them, and we made sure we created bubbles for the campus resources, awards and recognition. All of this were on here, just because it gives you a different vantage point. Just not in terms of where they are, but what are they? What functions are they? What do they serve? What kind of category do they serve? And Hugh didn't tell you about this The great thing about this software, you might not be able to get it through PDF, is you actually can click on it, and over here on the right, it'll actually have information or a description of the event right in the map itself.
So for example, if I found a diversity effort through your website or for Google, we use both, I would take the description and copy it right out of the website and put it. That's
the academic side of it.
Likewise, if it was a type of effort that was maybe a policy or a procedure or some kind of mission statement, I would put as much of that mission statement as applied to diversity, so you could really see the specific wording that goes into why it was included or not in the map, or why it was central or partial. You can actually see what data we used as a criterion for deciding that.
And again, it's about making this as communicative as possible. So if somebody accesses it electronically, they can find out the description of what it was.
Again, the value in this particular map that's divided, that's categorized by theme, is when you look at the overview, those of you who are interested in diversity efforts or are interested in putting your energies into diversity efforts on campus, this may help you decide, wow, we could really use more of this on our campus. So this will help you steer your efforts. If you think, wow, we must have a lot of clubs around diversity on campus, you find out maybe you don't. That's just an example. I'm not quoting data for your campus here, but it really helps you to decide, where do you want to channel your energies? What kind of student experience do you want to create? Do you need more staff and faculty diversity efforts?
And here were the destinations.
Oh, here were the destinations. So, central with a general, CGen is highlights diversity in general, so it has a generalized focus, it's an overview. CINC is works for inclusion and access of groups and intercultural sharing. What kind of efforts are bringing people in, are finding places for multiple identities on campus? CHU, historically underrepresented groups. It's marginalized groups is the effort devised just for one specific group on campus. CSJ is social justice, so this talks about power inequities and what's being done to remedy those. And CINT serves the needs of international students. Now, international students' needs, it's different than a global need. So, are your international students, how are they included in your diversity efforts on campus?
And here are some of the results. And I'm going to try to speed it up a little bit. We have time. I'm still recalling. The diversity efforts, 45%, which is a high percentage in our mind, focused on historically, contextually underrepresented groups. I put contextually because depending on the context of the political moment, the history, and even the region, what's underrepresented shifts. So it could be socioeconomic class, it could be gender, sexual orientation, and whatnot. So I put that there. 32% focuses on inclusion and intercultural exchanges. Again, it's important to differentiate events that are specific to one group and events that are specific to bringing more than one group together. So you've got maybe diversity in terms of a political advocacy, fight the cause for one particular group, or you've got a group that's maybe more social, relational in nature to bring together groups, maybe just under the rubric of the word multicultural. So you see that there's a range here, right? There's a gamut of what's possible with regard to these efforts and these programs and activities. And these are the conversations we always have amongst each other. It's like, how do we code that? But it's this. And, well, what about that? And it's not the same thing as that, and whatnot. And student affairs and enrollment management and academic affairs have the most diversity efforts. We still have some data coming in, so those might shift a bit. But your student affairs and enrollment management definitely has the large majority with regard to the efforts and practices that we coded. Student affairs, enrollment management, and academic affairs also not only have the most diversity efforts, they also have the most central focus, meaning that it was created for the purpose of diversity. And here's an interesting finding is that, again, you'll see kind of on the grid there is based on the function or the theme of what the diversity effort was, you've got a little bit of everything. So a little bit of everything is kind of the motto. You've got a smattering of some things here, a smattering of some things there, which again comes back to, which is fine if that's what your campus wants to do, but Some campuses want to do 4 major things that all divisions do together to make a real statement about diversity, or 1 major thing, and others, are like, let 1,000 flowers bloom. So they have like many things that are going on, and that's about your approach. Who do you want to affect? How do you want to affect? What's the impact? Most of your diversity efforts, even though the percentages aren't very high, are events. Events and extracurricular clubs. So you have a lot of events, a lot of speaker series, a lot of interesting speaker series. The only problem with events is that if they're not coordinated in a way where it's a series or linked to a course, right? Or followed up upon, or conversations continue afterwards, then oftentimes the impact of an event isn't as long-lasting or far-reaching as one would think. Actually, there's some research out of my field that looks at the impact of single-focused events on students' intercultural learning for up to 1 to 2 years later, or even that semester. And the data indicates that it might not be as high as we think. It could provide exposure, but maybe not very deep exposure. So again, something to think about. And 12% of diversity efforts are campus resources. This could be an office that is dedicated to a particular group to helping them, maybe with study skills, maybe with financial aid or whatnot. And most of your efforts target undergraduate students, of course, and all campus members in general. Not as much and little on employees or staff members. Actually, was your lowest percentage of what we could tell your efforts is targeting. Something definitely the campus wants to alert. It is about the students, but it's also, I think you've got a really amazing workforce to have a responsibility towards with regard to maybe skills, training, professional development, exposure to different views with regard to diversity. And collaborations. We found in our SurveyMonkey that about 61% of the efforts, which is higher than average, were actually collaborating with each other. So you do have some collaborations in place, meaning that some of these efforts are linked, they're shared between offices, they're shared across budgets. So that's 61%. Ongoing, we don't know. We couldn't tell, right, Hugh, from some of the data that we got. We even called some of the offices and they would tell us, we don't do that anymore. We stopped that for a variety of reasons. Maybe it was budget reasons. Maybe, and this happened a lot that I noticed in the academic senate's history, and it always happens in institutions, is that some events or efforts or practices or activities were dedicated and championed by one person, and then that person left the campus, and again, so does that practice, so does that activity. It always happens, and again, what do we do about that? How do we make it attached to the infrastructure and not to this person? Because then it's vulnerable.
Well, and from a data collection standpoint, I did some emailing to ask more about certain efforts on campus, and it wasn't always the case that an email came back to me. So this may be just a case of updating your website to the new person who's running something. So it shows that you want to get credit for what you're doing, and nowadays your website is a huge part of that.
And you want to have people there to answer questions, right?
Exactly.
People have, right?
Just a simple question about, does this still exist? Well, if I'm emailing the wrong person, then I don't know.
Budget allocations, we asked folks for their budget allocations related to the diversity efforts. Was it enough? It's never enough, right? Never ever enough. 54% said yes, and 45% actually, which is a high amount, said no, it was not enough. And in fact, many people actually designated a part of their budget to it, and they were really struck to do so. And then faculty, publications, research, and curricular projects. We did get some listings, and we put them on the map as much as we could do, but we did get some listings of faculty where they have journal articles, they have grants related to diversity. That is an untapped resource, is the faculty. Because the faculty may be doing some things that maybe the institution doesn't fully know. Maybe their chair knows, or maybe their colleagues know, but they're doing some really interesting work and some interesting research. So here's some of my recommendations before we end, and Hugh and Chris are going to jump in if I forget anything and have other ideas, is you definitely have solid footing for your student clubs, your extracurricular clubs and activities, and you do have solid footing for your historically underrepresented groups, especially in student affairs and enrollment management, SAEM. But there are scattered efforts. There's no pronounced emphasis. So again, the question becomes, is that what you want? Is that kind of de-emphasized approach useful or beneficial for your goals. Again, you have to have a conversation about your goals and vision of diversity. One-shot deals is what we're noticing, and many efforts are not ongoing, or from what we can tell, weren't as ongoing. But there are some areas to leverage, so there's no need to despair. Linking a lot of the great student life programs to academic courses and departments. Again, there's some definite collaborations that could happen that don't at many institutions. Sharing of programs, assignments, activities. Faculty experts on diversity. You could come up with a database of faculty experts with regards to different aspects of diversity. This is kind of like the faculty experts with regard to media. When the media contacts you and a faculty expert, they want a faculty expert on something to do with politics. You have a database for that. Same thing could be done with diversity. Employee training and professional development on diversity. Could there be more in-service workshops on different aspects of diversity? I think some of the best workshops I attended last year was about generational diversity, age-related diversity, because we're getting more and more reentry students. I teach at night, so most of my students are over 50. Diversity is important. A website, for example. I know there's a website related to diversity with regard to the Senate, the President's Diversity Council, but keeping that updated, making sure everybody knows about that website. Investing in, I piped through my note, investing in budget allocation on diversity, even now, in the scarce times that we are, and delineating what it will do. It sends a message. I do believe that you pay for what you value, and sometimes you make difficult choices, and perhaps this is something that will make your priority list with regard to the budget allocation. The Diversity Master Plan at San Jose State University, we allocated about $95,000 for it in its first year. I finished that project in 2 years. We had plotted it out so well now that it's running in its second year off of $40,000. So if you're attaching it to already existing programs, to owners and departments where it's in the infrastructure, it actually is pretty cost efficient if you want it to be long lasting. And I attached it to courses, and I attached it to folks that were already doing research on it. So it's running on half of what we started out with. So when people say, we just can't afford it, I have evidence to prove otherwise. Build the action into an infrastructure and not a person. And this is coming from somebody who for 2 years was on campus. And that's great, but I got a lot of phone calls when I left my role about some things that had fallen through the loop. So even though it's hard, you need someone in charge to help coordinate it, to help answer it. It's better if you have it in the infrastructure. Across programs, across several owners, across several departments would make it so much better, because then there's a sense of permanence, a sense of sustainability. Continue your campus climate committee. Your campus climate committee and their surveys are so important. They also can work as part of a rapid response team, because there are issues with diversity that aren't pleasant, hate crimes, reactive things that happen on campus that need directly relation to. There's some really good research out there where you can link campus climate findings to learning outcomes. So AAC&U has some campus climate instruments where you actually can link how students feel about their campus to how they think about the different programs on their campus. How engaged are they? So some connections to the NSE data, the National Student Survey of Engagement. All of those things can be linked to actual learning outcomes. And I think that's needed, because I think people think diversity is an extra thing you do, that it's just not as important as your math and science and your basic skills. It's something extra. And I don't think so. Work on a transformative diversity vision. What do you want SSU and the campus members to strive for? What do you want this to be? What do you want this not just to look like, but to feel like? And to be like. And more targeted events and trainings for employees. The director of diversity, I already did this, so I just left it on there, but I know it's an experienced faculty member, so you're already in the list as someone to kind of help coordinate it. Here's something that helps campuses, and this is something that we did at San Jose State, is putting together a faculty team of diversity fellows. What I did is I went and asked the deans for the most influential, and I kind of knew already, the most influential senior professors, one from every school in your case, who could be change agents, who could spread some messages, who could infuse a lot of enthusiasm. I bought them out for, I think, a course, a semester for a full year
And we would meet weekly, and we each had a project to do in our own academic schools. And it was wildly successful. It didn't cost that much. I got to spend time with 8 other senior faculty who were very influential change agents in their own academic colleges and in their own departments. And it's something that definitely is worth it. They each did a project related to pedagogy, research, or curricula, and there were so many results that came out of it. I can send you a link to see what the results were if you're interested. And using these mappings, not just that this in and of itself is an exercise, we always want this to lead to something more. And perhaps for strategic action, perhaps for identifying areas that need to happen, things that need to happen on this campus. This is what the mapping should really lead to. We've only done just like a little bitty step, and ultimately the campus can kind of take it from here. And I'll make sure I send this presentation, make sure it's updated, and you all can have access to it. And the finished large-scale maps are being finalized and will be delivered the next month or so. And then also those maps will be electronic versions, as well as large coastal scales, as well as a report with my recommendations. My report is much lengthier, much more detailed with recommendations, and all linked with research citations in higher education on diversity and the latest research. Hugh and Chris, did I miss anything? I know we're in a time crunch. Hugh, you want to add things? Come over here.
Yeah, I figured a lot of times this is a little more touchy-feely because that's how I am.
The mic, please.
This is a little more touchy-feely because that's kind of where I live. A lot of times when issues of diversity get approached on campus, sometimes it's met with rolled eyes, like, here we go again. We're going to try and do this again. And so a lot of our recommendations are based on things that really will create a culture of diversity appreciation on campus. And we've seen the results through the action steps that we took on our campus. And a lot of what it takes is, like Rona said with the Diversity Fellows, it created a really interesting buzz that is still present now. How long has it been since we finished that?
2 years.
2 years after we finished those action steps and the Diversity Fellows, there are still ripples of our efforts on campus. So diversity doesn't always have to be a thing to be tackled. It can be an exciting endeavor that can make you feel good about your investment on campus. And that's all I want to add. Oh.
Yeah, I think we're good. That concludes the presentation portion.
Okay, how about some questions? Susan?
Yeah, I have 2 questions. What percentage of the faculty responded to your questionnaires, and did you check the class schedule against the catalog to see how frequently courses were offered?
Yeah, I'll have Chris answer the second one. The first one, we had about 43%. It's my latest polling of faculty answered our survey. That might have been skewed because I know some faculty actually emailed me and told me they went in and answered it multiple times, but about 40, I'd say anywhere from 30 to 40% is what we got, which is more than I get on other institutions, so it was quite high. And Chris, do you want to talk about the schedule?
Sure.
That's a really good point.
Check that.
We did do that.
Yeah, we have 2 options in terms of figuring out which classes are still offered. One is asking the department chairs, which sometimes we do, but also we do check the catalog. And we go through and we highlight each course in there that is represented on our spreadsheets, just to see. And that's where the active numbers come from.
Yeah, and I think we took the latest. You're in your most recent version of your catalog. So the catalogs, I know that there are some course listings in your catalog that aren't offered every semester. And that actually, if there was more time, we could have actually even mapped that more and shown like this is every semester. You know, students can take this at least once a year, so to speak, and whatnot. But we didn't. We assumed that also with the catalog, the most recent version of the catalog, that those were at least the latest versions of the courses. Because deactivated courses are kicked out before the next catalog.
I'll raise with you, I mean, you came and ran. The question I still have is, they're using the course catalogs as descriptors may not be reflective of what happens in the classroom.
Sure.
And so that a person can say that we're going to talk about diversity is done in a very heterosexual or Eurocentric sort of format. And what I hear from students sometimes is that they're in a classroom and they're talked at, but may not relate to their experience. You know, I like the word you use, inquiry. It's not an engagement of conversations, or it's a kind of a very quick through. Let me tell you about the people in the penal system as an example. That kind of particular. And yet there's not a lot of detail behind that. It says, well, we've mentioned the fact that there are black people in jail. We all know that. I use that as an example, not a specific folks. Nobody can say that's criticized criminal justice. But you know, but I think part of this for me is there can be a very wide gap between what people say is offered and how it's offered. And what the student experience is that and how the student take it out as the next step.
Absolutely, and that's one of the things that we talk about a lot while we're in the process of doing this is how do we as researchers figure out if there is some accountability? And more importantly, we recommend to the university that you work hard on figuring out how do you enforce them, how do you hold faculty accountable for making sure that these things are done in a meaningful way, in a way that engages the students and not just talking over them. Maybe even leading in the wrong direction sometimes.
The other side of that is that diversity is engaged a lot of times impromptu in the classroom. I taught a public speaking course that I thematized, and my students could choose their own themes, and every semester that I did that, diversity became one of either diversity or social justice became one of the themes. And so my public speaking course became about diversity, but it's not listed as that. So, you know, the diversity happens whether it's mentioned in the catalog or not.
Yeah, and I guess you're coming at it from the point of view of if it's mentioned in the catalog and it shows up in the syllabus, especially like, let's say it's a GE course, but it's really not happening in a meaningful, engaged way in the actual classroom, is the issue. And that's the trickier issue because it's not something you'll be able to tell by doing a document analysis. It may only be something you'll be able to tell if you hear it from students or if you're doing a teaching observation, for example. I guess one of the things that I've heard that doesn't tackle that issue, but that it's by a department that is trying to investigate this, is that their curriculum committee has asked for 2 major assignments in every course that relates to an aspect of diversity that ties in with their course content. And some faculty are like, uh-oh, you know, was I supposed to be doing it? Because, you know, the department chair said, we've been dedicated to at least one major assignment for the last 15 years. And so it kind of came out a little bit more penalizing, so to speak, if I can use that word again. And people kind of were backtracking, but when curriculum committees kind of are investigating it, or at least wanting to create a depository, I know that it's happened that way. But it's so hard to figure out what faculty are doing. I guess maybe it's about creating a culture of inspiration where we get faculty to maybe reflect on what am I doing and what am I not doing. And maybe are there ways in my own class that I'm actually inadvertently or unintentionally silencing a student, for example, which I kind of found out in one of my other classes, and having those kinds of conversations. You could have your GE board, and we have one of those on our campus, that just comes down with a smackdown and says, you're not doing it, you're out, you're deactivated. I don't think it works for the most part. What does work is cultures of inspiration or cultures of incentivizing, where there's a pot of money, where courses are being developed to engage or facilitate meaningful dialogues around diversity, and maybe there's a stipend afforded, or sign time to look at that, or something, or some materials for their students, or some showcase, or awards. So you can use incentives as inspirations and to facilitate that change. But that's a great, great issue. And it's one we struggle with, because it's like, how do we really know? This sounds great, but how do we really know?
Well, part of it for me is that as a campus, it's not a criticism, so I would say, but as a campus that is as white as our campus.
Sure.
Many students may be the only one or 2 in the classroom, so trying to engage in a dialogue is going to take a lot more emphasis from the instructor than waiting on the students. So if you're the only African American,
yes,
it's very frequently the case in the classes. and you start talking about something, it takes a lot from the faculty perspective that's different from what's on the syllabus to get a student ready to talk about it. Or the student's a low-income student, for example, or the only re-entry student in class. How do you make sure that our homogeneous environment fosters something?
That perspective. And and that might be why perhaps Sonoma State University will want to invest more time and resources in building that skill in faculty. Because it's something that I'll have to do. I refer to my role often as a rotating advocate in terms of, and my classrooms are pretty diverse, but maybe there's a political perspective that's not getting air. That gets air everywhere else, but nonetheless isn't getting air, and would be an interesting debate amongst yourselves. So you'll see me, I'll be like jumping positions to kind of get people because the perspective hasn't been there. But if I'm the only Asian Pacific Islander in the classroom, and they're talking about a particular issue that relates to my group, and I'm a student, I'm wanting to kind of hang back, right? It's not always my responsibility. But it comes to faculty members, so those skills need to be developed in faculty. And we talk about that too. Now, faculty members get a little squirrely when you're talking about faculty and advocacy. What I'm talking about is the airing of perspectives and opening that up as a pedagogy, as a form of pedagogy. And there's some literature on that. There's some great literature. So I appreciate the question. Very good.
Yeah, that kind of relates to something I was thinking about, which is the relationship between the macro and the micro levels of cultural change.
Yes.
And my impression of what's going on the campus is at the macro level, there's a lot of movement in a positive direction, partly reflected in your data. You mentioned rapid response issue, though, at the micro level. You remarked that San Francisco State is doing some interesting things with rapid response.
Yeah.
And I wonder if you have any data either from this campus or other campuses about what's happening to the trends of micro issues requiring appropriate micro response, immediate response in relation to the larger trends which seem to be moving in the direction of greater cultural awareness and tolerance.
So are you talking about incidents that happen on campus?
Instances that happen on campus that should have a rapid response.
Yes. There's more of that happening, not just at the CSUs, but actually at universities in California with regard to speakers, graffiti, incidents, writings on the wall. We actually, at San Jose State, on the CSUs, at San Jose State University, we had some major issues and incidents with regard to our Muslim Student Association and our Jewish Student Union. And bringing in, I think it was the consul of Israel, the consulate from Israel was coming in to speak, and there were some issues about freedom of speech and whatnot. We actually went and made a visit to San Francisco State University. They have a terrific rapid response team. And I think everyone needs it. And it's not to be reactive, but it's to take those, what's called campus incidents, and make them learning moments for a campus. Because we went to San Francisco State University and we wanted to know, how did you get everything in place, and how are these addressed? Because we had responded too late to the Muslim Student Association. Feelings were hurt, bridges were broken, trust in the administration was lost, we felt horrible, we were all deflated, everybody, the campus was on a low. So we went out there to figure out, we want rapid response because it's about real people, real feelings. We don't want to stop people from coming to campus to air their views, but we want to be more sensitive about it. But we also wanted to figure out ways to make these learning moments. So they have a lot of trouble at San Francisco State University between, of all things, the college Republicans and the rest of the student groups. That's the big issue. That's the major explosive issue right now. And they told us not only about their infrastructure for rapid response team, and I encouraged this campus to maybe have someone go and visit, because they are a well-oiled machine. But they also talked about how they linked those incidents to courses. They had somebody write up all of the perspectives of each incident in each case. They provided it with kind of details of what happened and interesting questions. And they would send that out to faculty to debrief not too shortly after the incidents happened. So again, the macro to the micro, back to the macro again, I think is really compelling. And that's a great dynamic. So it is the way. Every campus is having a rapid response. Other questions? Yes?
You speak a lot onto how a lot of the diversity efforts on this campus outside of curricula is based on one-time events and extracurricular activities, which I would assume most of them come from student groups.
Yes.
And you talk also about how not connecting it to one person. So what are the implications of these student-run groups that put on these events, these one-time events, and then these students move on and move on for years, and then it dies? So how do we stop that from occurring?
Yeah.
Because it is kind of that person and that history. And, you know, to pass the torch on to the younger generation, it doesn't always happen.
That's such a great question.
So if the question is that if these students leave and these events stop happening and nobody cares, then what happens?
Yeah.
Then who's pushing those one-time events? And what is happening with those extracurricular activities? Do they just fall off the board completely?
Well, and the great thing is that some of the, and correct me if I'm wrong, many of the events that were one-shot deals, they weren't all, in fact, I think the student clubs actually had events that were repeated over and over again. I think there were some of the few that did. So it might not be as pronounced with the actual student clubs. But that's an excellent question, because that's an issue, because they graduate. We don't want to stop them from graduating. But they graduate, they move on to their lives, right? Hugh, you want to add to that?
One particular strength that your campus has is that a lot of your groups have mission statements that are very strong and are very specific about how diversity is approached for each of these organizations on campus. Now, some of the language was it looked like it was copy and pasted from statement to statement. And my thought was, wow, you know what, if this looked like it spoke to what that organization was really about and how that organization approached diversity, that may be one way of creating a sustainable culture of diversity that would outlast a particular student who likes to put, who's very good at putting on events, because it would be basically a part of their charter.
Apart from bringing in, always having a cohort that is a few years back or was planning to stay, other than that, but attaching it to the charter and the mission statement. But there's always going to be a tension with that, right? Because every student officer might bring in something different, might start up a new tradition, and how do you keep that going? So, yeah. And the faculty advisors, I'm not sure if SSU requires every student organization to have a faculty advisor meeting, but the faculty advisors, and I was one for 5 years in my department, and I became the depository. So, and I would kind of not inflict it, but I would say, this is a tradition, we always do this, This is communication studies, you would be breaking the tradition, and it would work. So we have these meaningful diversity-related events that I became kind of the depository of. So faculty advisors are useful.
Questions in the back.
Or we can talk afterwards, how about that?
I wonder whether you looked in the library as a resource and with respect to diversity, and also the issue of web accessibility. Web accessibility.
For the library or for the whole campus?
No, these are two questions.
Oh, okay.
The library and then the issue of web accessibility.
Library, we did. We found a lot of information about the library. They're pretty prominently displayed on our map, so there was a great amount of resources. Classes that were linked to the library or library.
There was course material, and there was also, you have a lab, I'm not correct, a fairly new lab with some great technology related to accessibility.
Yeah.
And that was really well advertised too, I knew all about it.
We have we have some efforts and programs and practices on web accessibility. It wasn't the major emphasis in all the efforts, but there are several on our mappings, but it wasn't the majority of what we found. But we could look again. But yeah, we did see some that were dedicated, some efforts, some trainings.
So did you look like at the library collection? Did you analyze the holdings?
No.
I think that might be a little onerous in light of the rest of our data.
No, we were kind of, in all honesty, we did not. We looked at what the library had offered, how they talked about diversity, some programs and practices, but not the holdings. At our own institution, we did look at the holdings. We looked at all the collections, we looked at the most recent collection, and we looked at the budget for each collection. So if there was more time, we certainly would have done that. And if it's information that's easily accessible or sent to us, that could be sent to us.
Well, also, our collections on campus were advertised as basically sets of cultural information, so they were very easily packaged and accessible and findable. So if I wanted to know about a particular culture, our library is organized around finding concentrated effort.
They have a page, I think, dedicated to each group, so it might have been that we couldn't find it as much. Other questions? I'm sorry, we're going to
In the back.
Hi.
Hi. It seems that a lot of your work has been how the university speaks about itself in its documents, on its website. We know that some of our web pages were put up a few years ago, may not have been updated. Some of the committees have fallen away. For example, we don't have a campus climate committee anymore. It was folded into the President's Diversity Council, and that function is not currently, or some of those functions are not currently being done. My question is, that's our external material that we transmit. The key is, I'm really interested in what you've done once you have that, so that it then has an impact on what happens in the day-to-day, because there's often, or there can be, a disconnect between what we say, what our catalog copy says, what's in our syllabi, what we say in terms of having a welcoming environment, and some of the experiences in our classroom. And that's the thing for me, that's the critical next step.
Yes, it is. And this hopefully will lead to that. We did look at your external face, so to speak, and your internal face, and we did collect information from survey respondents, program managers, chairs, faculty, MPPs, or your administrators about what you do, so you were able to tell us. I did get emails also from faculty with their own opinions of things as well, and that's all input as well. But for us, this was about, here's what's happening, or what is purported to be happening. But the next step for us, and this was at San Jose State University, this was the first step that we started out with our journey. Our journey then continued for another 2 years, or 1 3/4 year of putting a plan together. So we designed a diversity master plan design team, where we saw, okay, there are gaps here, we've got leverage strengths here, we can do these things, and these things are important to us, we can do these things now. It's going to take us quite a bit of time to design for these particular gaps. And we designed teams of faculty and staff and people that were committed to it, and even naysayers, to each group worked on those gaps. And then we did the hard work of action plans, budgets, sustainability, outcomes, see if they were working, assessment schedule, implementation schedule, and we put it into place. So I certainly am going to have recommendations about what could be done, but that next step is critical. Yeah, and we were only hired to do this part, so, but I'm going to give you as much info as I can. Yes.
Well, okay, so actually, before we started working on the actual plan, there was a step in between where we actually got feedback from the entire campus. We included students, staff, faculty, administrators, and we did forums where we allowed people to come in and tell us how they perceived what was going on campus, what they would like to see change, and what they thought that we were doing well already. And that actually, in addition to all the mapping that we did, led to a pretty good plan.
That was so much work, I kind of just blocked it. There were 2 major events. The first event had 300 campus members. We fed them lunch. We all brought them into a room. We had 4 key questions to ask them about what they wanted on this campus. Train facilitators at these round tables, serving with the lunch. And those facilitators were students. So students were involved in this design process as much as we were. And we did one all for students as well. And those forums were tremendous. Because people got a voice. They got to tell us what they really thought. And we took those into consideration in the plan. We took it straight up to the president, who was my boss at the time, and put those in place. So forums could also be the next step.
Well, let me say we've already, in fact, most folks in here have participated in a number of forums.
Yeah.
Most of that information, very much the way we did it, we sent to you. And the PDC, the President's Diversity Council, took all of those. I mean, we sifted through them. We sat with them for a year. People were yelling at us. We weren't doing anything. We were going through that stuff, trying to incorporate it in the action plan. which we now have finished. We've also come up with some matrices, what's first, what's second, what's third. We were waiting for this to see how it all fits, and then we want to roll it out to the campus so that there will be a plan of how do you actually sift it down into the bulk of the institution, not just have it be face value. So I want you to know the PDC is on it, and we're open for you all to come to our meetings and tell us what you think, and we'll be rolling it out to the Senate. We'll be rolling it out publicly, and I'm also hoping we will roll this out in a form that will be highly accessible, and we'll also put up the big maps in a central location.
And electronic on the website. And what I'll do is I'll take my final report and what we found and look also, because I do have that action plan, and I'll compare it with the action plan and add even more recommendations should they need it. So, yes?
I'd like to approach this question just real quickly. Something that happened on our campus is when we advertised them out, actually they got leaked before we officially sent them out, is those maps, the buzz about them, actually created action before we even released our plan. It started a conversation within individual departments, so it wasn't necessarily always university-wide that having a mapping and having this research started changed our campus. It started changing it before we were even actually done with our research.
And then some people are like, why aren't we on that?
Yeah.
We do good stuff. Well, isn't that on there? Or maybe we don't do good stuff. What
It was
do you say?
competitive.
It was competitive. So it kind of, that was an after effect of the maps. Other questions? I know we're out of
I was just wondering, it seemed like the categories that you had, sort of historically underrepresented, social justice, didn't necessarily take into account more intersectional approaches that were less identitarian or less focused on a given set of actions, for example. And I wondered if there was a way that the map might reflect both coursework and programming that does multiple things well simultaneously, given that that seems to be the movement of where diversity is heading in the future?
Sure. I appreciate that question. That is so important. What we did is, we did kind of a grounded theory approach. We developed categories based on what we could see in encompassing. So unfortunately, I think the way we do curriculum is the problem, not just here, but everywhere, where we don't think of it intersectionality-wise. So things aren't written that way. We weren't able to tell if folks did multiple things at once. Socioeconomic class and ethnicity, we weren't able to tell that. If we went back now, I think we would find more survey items that allow people to do that. Mapping that becomes a little bit different. We have like 6 different colors, but we could do it.
Yeah, it becomes where if you have too many categories, then the color, the impact of the visual of the map becomes too spread out. So, it all begs the question of what you want your map to do.
Right, but isn't that what you're asking us to do with our catalog, is to create those little symbols?
I am. I mean, yes, I am. And there's got to be a way for us to be able to identify that from department to department to be able to do that. Because I think that would be excellent. Our definition on our campus was an intersectional definition. We didn't have just one aspect or 3 or 4. It was specifically pronounced that it was the intersectionality of the following aspects, and in contradiction with one another, in conflict with one another, in congruence with one another, and I think you're absolutely right. It's about maybe thinking of different ways we have ourselves listed and documented. So, yeah. Intersectionality, yes, and perhaps you're working with a different definition than I am, but intersectionality for us is that many of our lives, our experiences, our identities crisscross across a variety of aspects multiple times, change and fluctuate in different contexts so that something becomes more pronounced in one place than in others. That's what I mean by intersectionality. It's not just a forever crisscross. It's a constant push and pull of multiple aspects of your identity. Yes?
Could you say more about the potential roles or usefulness of a rapid response team?
Yeah, sure. The potential role or the usefulness? For us, it became really important for us because when I I was in the office of the president, something would happen. A fire at Hallel, like a burning of the sukkah at Hallel. And the office of the president was the last one to find out. We get a police briefing and a police report, but we didn't see that by the time of the end of the workday. Stuff had happened, and if you don't respond within an hour, there is irreparable damage. I cannot emphasize to you enough how important that rapid response team is. So we actually got all the key players in the room: the chief of police, the chair of campus climate, all the diversity officers on campus, the president, the student affairs AVP, and anyone else that was involved. Who was going to write the memo? Who was going to make the phone call to the injured parties? Who was going to maybe start an investigation? There was an investigation. Who was going to protect freedom of speech? Right? Because we were on ACLU's website for quite a while as being anti, freedom of speech. Who was going to do all these things? And yes, there's legality issues that people want to keep track of, but it was really more to protect our students and to make sure that that community, that sense of community, wasn't violated. So if there's any way you can research rapid response teams, there's quite a bit out there. But the gold standard for me right now on rapid response is San Francisco State University. And they were fabulous. We asked them, we told them about our problems. They invited us up for lunch. They had all of their same team members, their AVPs, their chief of police waiting for us, and they shared everything with us. And they had a system. So I can't emphasize it too much. Other questions? Because we have time. I didn't think we had time.
About 20 minutes.
Questions? Comments?
We can end early.
Yeah. We've exhausted you, maybe.
Oh,
Yes.
here's one.
Hi.
Let's still kind of okay. What's your definition of campus climate committee?
Oh, my definition of campus climate committee? My definition is based on my own campus, so let me go there. It's a campus that looks at the experiences of all campus members with regard to the very first day they arrive on campus. So this includes staff, faculty, students, through their facilitation of their success on campus. So for us, that involved faculty, staff, students, representatives from that. We do an annual survey. We ask about things like, to what extent do they belong? Do they feel like they belong? Are they included? How welcome are you? We actually use Campus Climate on our campus to look at customer service for our students. So we know there were some problems over admissions or whatnot if we needed to know. And things like safety, public safety for all of our students, but also intellectual safety of our departmental faculty members. Do they feel comfortable to express divergent viewpoints, especially the untenured folks? We kind of use the larger kind of perspective of campus climate, but yeah. And is that kind of the same vision for here? The sense is, I read some things about from campus climate, perhaps dated back from the that folks had sent me, that there was a campus climate.
I should say it's one of the 4 areas in the President's Diversity Council.
Yeah, that's what I saw.
Yeah. So it's something that we had both historical evidence from, but also some evidence in new directions.
And so some of those concerns now that the President's Diversity Council was.
Right.
Does that help?
Thank you, yes.
I wanted to go back to your question about clubs having faculty advisors, because they do have faculty advisors. But
Yeah.
I think that the role of the faculty advisor in providing for continuity would be greatly enhanced if there was more recognition of the workload involved and recognition of this as a major contribution to campus service.
I agree. And as we're, and there's a way. There's a way, and the way is because NSF, the National Science Foundation, has great new literature that stipulates that those student clubs, right, aren't just social, little things that happen, right, after hours. They are retention, making, achievement gap closing, community building for our students. So NSF is funding these great student clubs on our campus where they want us to use student clubs in chemistry and biological sciences to reach out to students to help them with their tutoring, to get them into work-study groups. So once as it starts to transcend this whole notion that it's just this casual thing, I think it's going to be attached more to RTP. I think it's going to be given some funding. I think it's going to be more serious. I think there's something there untapped. Definitely. And for some, and this isn't a stereotype, for some groups, first generation, certain socioeconomic groups, those peer cohorts are key. They're essential to academic success. I appreciate the question. Yes?
I missed the beginning of your presentation, so I apologize if I raise something that you addressed, but I wonder whether you make a distinction in your research between diversity as variety, so that different things happening, and diversity that kind of reflects on itself. So that you thematize the issue of diversity. Have you also looked at variety?
Like variety of groups, or?
Well, I mean, if you have, like, I'm in philosophy. If we offer, like, African philosophy, Chinese philosophy, German philosophy, if we don't thematize philosophy as diverse, you still do something interesting, right?
Yes, no, absolutely. I think I know what you're getting at. Correct me if I'm wrong. And we talked about this was, and it's the whole notion of what I talked about earlier about diversity as subject matter versus diversity as inquiry or as a form, and taking that kind of a different position with regard to it. So you can have diversity as a type of perspective, as a type of orientation, as a way of thinking, as a way of seeing the world as this larger orientation, correct? That can be virtually connected to any topic, all topics as it should. Or you can have a topic that specifically relates to how it plays out with a group. And in Chris's, we debated this, right? We debated this issue of how do we code that with regard to curricular offerings, where it's diversity as inquiry versus diversity as subject/group matter. Because I think that they're getting at important things in very different ways. And we did that, right? We didn't code it that way, but we looked at like African studies or the different area ethnic studies and those kinds of things. Is it different than other university courses? So,
yeah, and we also, we were rather impressed whenever we found that inquiry-based course that focused on diversity.
Like the methods course. And that's the thing for us is philosophy is a great angle, is that if you really want to look at infusing diversity meaningfully, just across all schools, all departments, areas like philosophy or areas where we're like, what's a course that every student has to take or ventures into? Or what's a course that's similar and common across all departments? And we found research methods, not all departments, but that research methods or theory-based courses, like an intro to theory in the field or an intro to how to do research, was common in a great majority of academic colleges. So is there something we could do for those kinds of courses? And so we played around with the idea of thematization. So what we did is I paid a stipend to a faculty member who created a faculty toolkit. And this faculty toolkit, this was Jane, was a toolkit that could be adaptable to a lot of different disciplines that had examples from a variety of groups that could be used in a research methods class. It had data sets, free available data sets. It had assignments. It had websites that could be utilized. That in communication studies, I teach methods. I teach quantitative and qualitative methods. I could use it. And my cohort over in nursing with regard to methods, nursing research, could also use it. And it was made free to all faculty. It was kind of passed around, and we're trying to research the effect of that. So inquiry-based fields, such as yourself, and then others, could also be a nice window into that. You would impact more. Because not everybody takes my intercultural communication class. I want them to. But I'm getting a small percentage of folks.
Anybody else?
Anybody else? Thank you so